Welcome to another edition of Be the Change Georgia, where we amplify the voices of the inspiring business leaders surrounding the B Corp and social impact movements across the Southeast to help you learn how to build your legacy at the intersection of people, planet, purpose, and profit. Today, there are more than 8,000 B Corps in over 80 countries and 180 different industries, unified by one common goal: transforming the global economy to benefit all people, communities, and the planet. If you want to learn how to plug into our purpose-driven business community alongside the inspiring leaders we feature on this show, check us out at belocalgeorgia.com or on Instagram or Facebook at belocalgeorgia, and we'll hope to meet you at our next event. Today, you get to hear from Brandy Hall, founder and CEO of Shades of Green Permaculture, an Atlanta-based company transforming landscapes and lives through regenerative design and ecological stewardship. With nearly 2 decades of experience, Brandy has built a values-driven company that not only restores land, but also fosters meaningful jobs and long-term impact in her community. In this conversation, we dig into her journey from solo entrepreneur to visionary leader of a thriving team, how she learned to build systems that support sustainability, and what it truly takes to grow a mission-aligned business in a profit-first world. Brandy shares vulnerable insights about the highs and lows of entrepreneurship, the realities of running a values-led company, and why she believes in progress over perfection. Whether you're a purpose-driven entrepreneur, business leader, or simply someone curious about how business can be a force for good, you'll walk away from this episode inspired and energized. Let's dig in. Brandy Hall, welcome to Be the Change Georgia. Glad to finally have you on. How are you?
I'm doing great. Thank you so much for having me on. I'm excited to be here.
I know, it's very exciting. We've known each other you're one of I think at this point, one of our the OGB Corps.
OGB.
OG. The original OGB.
Right.
Folks, you might want to Google that reference, unless you're our age. Well, I'm excited to unpack so much with you. And just from the entrepreneur space to what y'all actually do, and I don't want to call it the green footprint, but everything from I've been to the office, and I remember the volunteer day when we cleared the green space, and it's just really cool to this all come full circle and have you on. So without further ado, we'll get rolling. We always do these planning calls before we start, and we talked about this turning point when you realized you weren't just creating a job for yourself, but you were actually building a sustainable company and creating good jobs for others as well. Talk about that turning point, if you could. And when you realize, because everybody kind of goes into entrepreneurship thinking I'm going to work for myself. And I'd love to unpack your kind of story of oh, this is bigger than me now.
Mm-hmm. That's a really great question. I guess where there are probably a lot of micro turning points, like little trim tabs that have affected the direction of Shades of Green for sure. But I think a really big one was, I started the company in 2008. And then it became my full-time work in 2010. And then I hired an assistant, or I hired a person. Classic entrepreneurial mistake, I think, hiring a person and then having no systems and being I don't know, just do what I do. I have no system, how we price things, how we, talk to clients, how we manage callbacks, every single point of contact, there was nothing there. And so as you can imagine, that is classically didn't work well.
I feel every entrepreneur just chuckled.
Yeah, totally. Yeah. So then I scaled it back again a little bit and hired an assistant. It's okay, if I can do all of the things, quote unquote, of the company, and I can have somebody just kind of helping me directly rather than just replicating exactly what I'm doing, because it's not replicable yet. And so then as I started to kind of go through that, I thought it was probably 2013 or 2014. And then the really big turning point came when I found out I was pregnant with my daughter. So then all of a sudden I had this kind of oh shit moment of oh, if I want to take any sort of leave and my entire livelihood is dependent on me showing up and being on site, then I need to start getting to work. So there were a very intensive 9 months in there of figuring out what the systems are and how to delegate. And, it was also chaotic, but I think it was really like the propulsion into the next iteration of Shades of Green that I needed. And it very fortuitously at that time, we used to do in-person permaculture design certification courses, and we would partner with a community partner. And the time we were partnered with a school, and the person who was our like community liaison for the school came to me afterwards and she was like, I'd love to work with Shades of Green. What do you need? And at the time I was like, I need blog posts. She came in for like a week and she was like, you don't need blog posts, darling. You need systems. And she's now our COO. She's been with us for 8 years, Rebecca Baxter. She's amazing. But she just has, it was just like one of those fortuitous moments where exactly what I needed, I didn't know I needed. And she was the sort of like her zone of genius is really around like systems and processes. And, it has enabled me over the years to dwell more in my zone of genius or whatever. So, of thinking, further ahead and being out in the community and strategic vision and, all of those things. So it's really, we practice EOS or Entrepreneurial Operating System at Shades of Green, and they talk about the visionary integrator relationship. And I think ours is like very iconically that, which has been sort of the secret sauce, I think.
Yes, the old visionary struggle of like processes, like I don't know, it's just you just remember everything in your head and you just sometimes wake up in a ball of anxiety because you don't know what you need to do tomorrow and there's a big
Totally.
list, but what do I prioritize? And yeah.
Right. Managing budgets from gut instinct, like that goes only so far. you know, um, you hit a certain point. I was like, yeah, managing like $100,000 budget when I set out, that was one thing. Managing like a multi-million-dollar budget from my gut is like, ugh, do I need to refinance my house to make payroll? I think I need help.
I have a friend that helped me plan like the first 3 or 4 build Southeast, and like dear friend in Asheville, and she's an EOS integrator, or technically not EOS. She does something very similar, but I remember one of the first meetings, and I was talking about something, and she's like, "Hey, can I interrupt you?" And I'm like, "Sure." She's like, "So you're the reason we're all here, and this vision's brilliant, but like, I know you well enough to know that you're an unorganized mess. Do you mind if I take notes and keep us organized?" I was like, "No,
Oh,
absolutely, please."
what a concept.
It is a great founder tip, though. I think once you realize that it's not that that's your weakness, it's that your strength lies elsewhere.
hmm
That I think a lot of us miss, and we kind of like beat ourselves up over it. Like you can go look at my car right now. I think you've learned, or my office.
hmm
I'm never gonna be that person, and I've kind of
hmm
grown to be okay with it.
Yeah. I think where, is deceptive for me is that I am a hyper organized person and I'm very like type A in a lot of ways, So I felt like I've got this and I've got this like, independence that comes from, all kinds of childhood things that I thought was really an asset, but then realizing that that can only take me so far because there's also this other core piece that really likes following the shiny objects and chasing the next big thing that kind of gives you that adrenaline rush of like, wouldn't this be cool, but as the company grew, that idea of like organizational whiplash where it's like, wait, I thought we were focusing on this, oh fuck, now we have to like turn our attention here you know
Oh, yeah, no, I actually turned my desk away from my window. I used to look out in the backyard and I literally chase squirrels. So I'd be watching like, oh, there's a hawk in my fish pond. And the person I'm talking to is like, what are you talking about? I'm like, sorry. My brain just goes like, oh, look at that happening right now.
right. And then I think that that can be a real asset when you have the like people and team and processes in place to be able to harness it without losing your core focus, which is I think where EOS has just been such a game changer. That's another place I would say in the company history where we leveled up.
Yeah. Well, you might have, 10 good ideas. One of them might be great and worth pursuing. The other 9, somebody has to tell you your baby's ugly.
Right. And
Or
no,
not
you
right
can't
now.
accomplish this by next week. Like, and that's unreasonable.
Well, that makes me think of like the fact that, obviously it's in the name of the business, Shades of Green, but running a quote unquote green business, a sustainable business, like what did you learn along the way when, like, I think a lot of us that go in either social entrepreneurs or, sustainability focused businesses, we at some point learn some valuable lessons about what's realistic. So I'd love to hear kind of like your journey there of learning like the idealism of this business and then the reality though also of, like you said, do I have to mortgage my house to make payroll?
Right.
So yeah, what have you learned along the way to like balance your desire to be the greenest and a great place to work and all these things with the reality that is a cash flow statement?
Yeah, it's a great question. I really like to think of grades of sheen.
Charlie Sheen's new,
That's a new one.
coming your way.
There's like, various degrees of shiny out there. No, shades of green. I like to think of shades of green as a proof of concept in a lot of ways that we can be both very values driven and, have feedback processes built into the company that are constantly evaluating best practices based on a changing environment on so many levels, both ecologically, economically, so many things. And also consistently show that we can be not only profitable, but we can be an amazing place to work that goes above and beyond industry standards around, offering profit sharing and parental leave and robust employee benefits and, a month of paid time off and all of these things that I think there tends to be a tendency in the green sphere, especially in the green sphere, of you either have to choose this or you have to choose that, but you can't have both. Like if you're going to be a quote unquote like bleeding heart company that's just doing everything for the greater good, then it's at the sacrifice of your bottom line, versus I think the way that we try to approach it is we can have a healthy company culture and we can have a healthy financial culture, and we can also really live into our values. And I would say over the years too, we went really hard on our values for a minute when we were in the COVID era market, because our industry, being landscaping, just exploded, which was a blessing and a curse. Like we were building the engine as the machine was barreling down the hill at 200 miles an hour. It was like, we learned a lot that, along the way there, I would say, especially as it comes to like personnel and the human resource side of things that are places I have not studied, and then you get into different situations and you're like, okay, now we need a CHRO to come in and help us navigate these things and have systems in place, but in COVID, we were fortunate enough to just have so much work ahead of us that we had to start putting filters in place. So we leaned in really hard around what is it that we offer and how can we educate our clients about that, and how can we say no to things that we're just like, don't want to do at all, or are not our most profitable, or are not values driven. Like a great example of this is we got really into recycled concrete, which is an amazing material. We live in an urban world where everything's constantly getting redeveloped and busted up and it goes to landfill. And there was a point where we're like, we'll never use stone again, and clients are like, but I don't really want like, like concrete chunk patio. I laugh now, but, and then some definitely do, but you can't like force a value. So it's constantly coming back to our mission of like shades of green. It's whatever shade of green, it's making those incremental steps toward doing better. And we don't have to be like hyper rigid. One of our core values is welcome the unexpected, which is really about having flexibility. And now that we are in a market where we're not blessed with, a year ahead of us of just work that we can't get to quick enough, because of all the economic uncertainty that we're facing globally and especially in this country. We had to be a little bit more discerning, like where are the places that we can say yes and without sacrificing our values, but are really less about having rigid boundaries and more about saying yes to where people are, meeting them there and bringing them into this vision of stewardship.
That's so brilliant. I mean, I say the same thing all the time about sustainability of like, in a weird way, getting rid of this ideological like purity test. If like, if you don't want the recycled concrete, you're just a horrible, horrible human and you don't understand sustainability. You don't really, yeah. And it's like, well, if this is what but they want the rest of it.
Right. And it's still pervious, or there are certain things that we're not willing to sacrifice on because of their impact. But then, like, where are those? And it's interesting because then it goes back to just the core kind of thesis of Shades of Green when I started it, like why it has the name is because I don't find myself to be a hyper rigid person. Like, I have the type of personality where I can see, like, yes, and like it could be this way, it could be that way, and it might be this way. I could see an argument for all of them, and tend to be more inclusive in terms of points of view. Um, so I think that in a way it was a good learning opportunity because we kind of departed from that a little bit and got more rigid, and then we came back, and that's been like the expansion and contraction of our growth anyway. I would say as we go through periods where we adopt a new process and we get hyper rigid and we say this is what it is from now on, and then we like get some feedback about how that maybe doesn't work all the time, or we need to be a little bit more flexible, sometimes harder feedback than other times. And then there's a period of relaxation and softening and saying like, okay, maybe we went a little too hard that way. Like the pendulum's always kind of trying to find its equilibrium.
Well, yeah. And I think for you, I mean, as a B Corp too, we always talk about like stakeholder driven, whatever. For a while there, they started calling stakeholder driven economic system. I'm like, it's still capitalism. But there's that stakeholder, like, don't take away my supply and demand curves. That's how we win. Um, there is that need though, and it sounds like you've either evolved into or really gotten good at, which is tough for most founders, to listening to all yours, because it sounds like you're getting feedback from customers, but then you're getting feedback internally from employees. You're getting all this feedback of like what works, what doesn't, and then that is where the gut decision has to come in of like, okay, how much are we willing to give up on the rigidity or the purest of sustainable landscaping to,
Mhm.
okay, this is what the business needs, this is what the people want, both internally and externally.
Hmm. And then there are some things that it's interesting because, I think externally or, outside looking in, gotten mentorship like, oh, this will never work. You have to do it a different way. A great example of that is like sheet mulching. Like so many folks in the industry and peers, how is it like how does it make economic or financial sense to offer sheet mulching, which is when you use recycled cardboard to create like a weed barrier that then breaks down. um, you lay that on top of the soil that you've kind of cleared vegetation, maybe you've left the vegetation underneath so it breaks down, you lay the cardboard, you put the compost and mulch, and then you've created a planting bed that suppresses the weeds, but the cardboard breaks down over time and adds carbon to the soil and all the good things. And it is a challenge, but we've gotten creative. I think it's usually those moments where you're like, this won't work is just an opportunity for creative solution finding. So, whether it's that we post through our channels, hey, if you have extra cardboard boxes, like come drop them off on these days at our, what we call Shrub Hub, our like staging materials yard, and then our community is involved in bringing their boxes and they're not going to, be recycled, or which is a great thing too, kind of,
Yeah.
maybe.
I've
Yeah,
learned a lot. Well,
TBD.
I've also learned a lot about recycling though. Like a lot of
Yeah,
that, like with glass, and when it's all commingled, like glass breaks, it's
plastic.
embedded in the cardboard, and then the cardboard's trash.
Yeah,
So I also stole that last year from you, by the way, and I did sheet mulching.
nice.
I my compost was not finished when I spread it, and I got a really cool volunteer garden out of it. So
It's awesome. You're like, I wanted some
I
squash
was
over
ready to plant, and I'm like, there's things coming out of it. And it was a bunch of
there.
different, like every different type of tomatoes growing. You're like, cool.
Sweet. Life's wanting to live over here. Yeah, my cousin is he's with waste management, or he used to be, and he was breaking down their process for waste management. And he said everything, all the recycling gets loaded on a barge and goes all the way to China. And then if there's anything in the load that is not acceptable, oftentimes the whole load gets shipped back on a barge and then put in the landfill. So you think you're doing something great, but then you've added a trip to China and back
And back,
to the carbon footprint,
so I can go to the landfill.
so it can go to the landfill.
Yeah, no, I've had that conversation with my own mom, who like still loves her 20-ounce. My Midwestern's going to come out pop bottles, and she's like, it's, but I recycle them, and I'm like, oh, I'm about to ruin your world. You try to not be that person. Like, I wonder, does that come up in your work too, where you try to not, like, when you know this much, to not be like the Brandy Downer, like
Yeah,
not like the bubble burster, but to not get people so depressed that they don't want to do anything like that. I mean, we've already talked about the journey, but how do you navigate that type of, I don't know, situation?
I think I think like our marketing and how our brand story and how we talk about the work that we do kind of addresses that in a way. Like I think I'm hopelessly optimistic a lot of times. Um, and I think that that comes through in how we talk about what we do. Like the approach has always been, and I think that this is where it's really juxtaposed with a lot of like environmental organizations or permaculture specific. I think there's a real tendency to get on the soapbox and kind of um, like, greener than thou kind of do that to people. And I have just like an allergy to evangelism for going back to childhood stuff. Yeah, I have an allergy to evangelism. So my approach has always just been like, hey, we're doing this thing and it's really cool and it's a beautiful vision. You want to be a part of it? And I think people respond really well to that when it feels more like an invitation than a shame, you know, kind of beratement.
Yeah. I mean, and I think a lot of people are pivoting to that. I think people are starting to realize, like, even with like the climate change stuff, like, talking about, polar ice caps melting might not resonate with most people. It's kind of scary. But if you talk about like clean air in your neighborhoods and the effect on
Right.
your kids' asthma, people's
Right.
ears perk up.
Yeah, and it's more localized. Like I think that that's one of the things that's really a challenge when you're talking about environmental movements is so many of the things are externalized both on like geographically and at a time scale that is not really comprehensible, or easily understood because then there's the immediate thing in the day of like I got to get my kid to school and I got to get to work and I got 10 meetings and I have this thing to do after, all the just like day to day things that are happening, it's really hard to think about things that are not immediately in your face, in your neighborhood, in your community. And I think also people just have, I mean, I'll speak for myself, it's like a fear overload at the time, there's just so much shit going on all the time. And especially, it doesn't seem to be getting better, and it can be paralyzing, so how can you think about the polar bears when you're wondering if you can afford to put breakfast on your family's table, you know? So then it really just comes into, for me, it's like, what are we putting our energy toward? What are we creating? And can we do it out of a place of love and hope for the future, versus like response of just, oh shit, everything's sinking. I have to do something, like bailing out with a tiny little bucket, this Titanic. It doesn't really feel like you're getting anywhere, you know.
Have you been able to bake that mentality into like your team and your customers too, of like the first step's okay, and then let's take the second step? Like, how have you been able to bake that sustainability into, like, I would say the corporate culture, but people will think too much internally. So both the culture, both with internal stakeholders and external stakeholders.
That's a great question. I think it comes through in our messaging, but I think it's also just like what we say yes to. Like, um, I think people feel inspired to participate in something. Like even when we talk about our mission, it's like, empowering people to participate in the Earth's return to health. People want to make incremental changes. And I think that flows all the way into like how we do our proposal processes. We're not like, okay, this is what you have to do. You either do all of it or it's not worth doing. We're like, let's phase this in. Let's build a relationship. We work with a lot of clients through design and installation, and then into our caretaking and our eco-lawn services, where there's education points all along the way. So even if you don't do what we're recommending now, you understand from the very first conversation why we're making that recommendation and how you can apply that same thinking in future decisions that you're making in your stewardship. And then we talk about that when we get to our go from design. These are all the reasons that we said, let's plant X, Y, or Z, or let's manage the water this way, or let's do this for the soil. Maybe you only put in 20% of it because we all have financial and budgetary constraints, right? And then work with us over time and we'll help you phase it in, and we'll help you understand kind of what decisions to make and when. We do in our caretaking teams, we have most of our clients work right alongside our team. And the idea is that eventually they graduate from caretaking. They feel empowered enough. It's not like, oh, now we've got you hooked for the next 20 years. You're going to be paying us monthly. Take care of this thing because you don't want it to die. The idea there is they've invested in their landscape, and then they work with us to understand how to read and how to interact with their landscape. And at some point, they don't really need us anymore. They feel empowered to move a plant or add some mulch or tweak their water system, or, to be the steward of their land.
That's amazing. Yeah. Basically like designed to like fire us. We want you
Yeah.
to.
Yeah. It's planned obsolescence, but in a good way.
As I look at my phone and go, I might need a new one soon.
Right.
Slow it down.
Right.
Oh, what a word. What advice would you give to business owners who want to do the right thing, but feel we talked about it from the consumer standpoint, like financial constraints, but from a business standpoint, I use the analogy with the B Corp assessment of it being a buffet line. And if you eat everything on the buffet line, you'll feel really bad, AKA you'll go broke. And I have it in like 3 of my presentation slides: no margin, no mission.
Yeah. Yeah. You have to be profitable in order. That's what makes a company, right? It's what keeps it going. And it's not just, I think the perception of profit is like, oh yeah, and then you're just like lining the owner or the CEO or the board's pockets. But really it's about reinvestment. Like I would say the first 10 years, we're celebrating our 17th anniversary this month. The first 10 years of the company, at least, actually probably more than that, probably the first 15 years of the company, every bit of our profit was reinvested in the building of the company, and it has really been like team driven and driven by our employees, I would say, like that, the people over profit kind of movement. If you invest in your team and you invest in a really healthy workplace and a healthy company culture, and it becomes an amazing place to work, then people want to stay there. And your retention over time, you're taking out all of those hidden costs of so much turnover. You have evangelists built in, you have sales mechanisms built in because people love where they work and they tell people about it, and it just amplifies your mission, I would say. And then, as it does become more profitable, just continuing to invest in your people and your client base. Like right now we're at a place where we're just reevaluating our entire customer experience. Like we get great feedback from our clients all the time, but we're asking like, how can we make it even better? How can this just go so far above and beyond so that when they talk to their friends and their neighbors, it's not just the landscape speaking for itself or their like one positive experience, but it's, from a tiny ember, a huge fire rages, they say.
Yeah, no, I mean, and what I hear coming out of that too is like, it feels like you've learned how to look at some of those, because again, this is like the big misconception with I think B Corps and purpose driven, whatever, social enterprises, is that like all these things that we do are on the L side of the P&L. And I think flipping that mindset, like you said, looking at it from like a retention standpoint, from a, adding in profit sharing too, like this is your money, like being not thrifty, but being diligent about what we use and waste and all these things, like this money comes back to you. I think empowering your employees, like this is more an investment into the P side of the P&L than just sunk cost.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I mean, you think of like the metaphor of like rowing a canoe, if you're just doing it by yourself, you're only going to get so far. But if you have 25 people that are rowing in the same direction and see that the success of the company is their success, then it's just becomes a really powerful boat.
That's awesome. I could go on for hours, but
I know, me
unfortunately
too.
we have time limits and things. But no, for a break from our commercial sponsors. No, Brandy, this has been awesome. I mean, I know just from working with you on, I mean, literally I remember the volunteer day, and just paying attention, like, how are they doing this? Like, what are we doing here? Like, what are we spreading? How are we, like, even like all these things that I've picked up along the ways, and some of the volunteer days at community gardens around Atlanta and stuff. I learned how to make compost tea. So it's just a real treat to actually finally talk to you about how to run a business.
Thank you.
So I just want to thank you for coming on and for all that you do and well, I don't want to trigger your childhood, but all the good all the good gospel that you're spreading.
Thank you. That's funny. Yeah, thank you so much, Nathan. It's always a pleasure to have an opportunity to talk with you. And I really appreciate everything you do to just lift up B Corps. It's cool that we can be in so many different industries, but really kind of go in the same direction and trying to solve real problems with business,
And be an example. So yeah, which you are. So thank you. In the show notes, we'll have all the places to find you on the socials and all those things. Cause yeah, great tips. Even if you're not a client, just great tips and a good follow. And a great company that we're proud to call a B Corp and call a Georgia B Corp. So thanks, Brandy.
Yeah, thank you so much. Enjoy your afternoon, morning, day.
Or whenever you're listening to this, your drive, your flight, whatever. Well, that wraps up another edition of Be the Change Georgia. We're grateful, as always, for the opportunity to serve you with this content and grow this incredible community of purpose-driven B Corp leaders. If you haven't already, we would be grateful for you to rate this show wherever you get your podcasts by simply tapping the number of stars you think it deserves and sharing it with a friend. This helps us get the word out and continue to use our collective influence as a force for good. This podcast wouldn't be possible without the help from our production team at Chat with Leaders Media. Learn how you can launch your own podcast to grow your business at chatwithleaders.com. Thanks again for listening, and now go be a leader worth following.